I'm absolutely thrilled that Kajal Odedra, who's a writer and activist with over 13 years of experience in the campaign sector, has agreed to join us. Kajal is the UK Executive Director for Change.org, which is the largest petition platform. She's grown the platform to over 19 million users in the UK. She's supported some of the biggest people and powered campaigns in the UK, from Laura Croyton's campaign to end the tampon tax to Richard Ratcliffe's fight to free his wife Nazanin from prison in Iran. After identifying a diversity problem in the UK campaign sector, she founded the People of Colour in Campaigns Network. She's on the board for Save the Children UK and Ada's List. Her first book, Do Something, Activism for Everyone, A Guide to Grassroots Activism, is out now. Welcome, Kajal.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you all today. I think if you can share my slides, is that happening? Yeah, great. Okay, so the theme of the conference today is building back together. And I want to make the case that in order to do this, we all need to adopt the mentality of activists. But first, let me start by telling you a little bit about me. If we go to the next slide. This is a picture of me and my mum, and it was taken when we'd recently moved to Derbyshire back in the early 90s. Before then, we were living in Leicester in a predominantly Black and Asian community. And when I was around 6 or 7, we moved to a white working class village called Newhall. When we arrived, the environment that we arrived to was hostile. We experienced a lot of pushback, racism that was both physical and verbal. Some of the most difficult memories aren't actually the instances of abuse that me or my family experienced. But for me, some of the harder memories are those memories of asking for help from the police, local authorities, or teachers, and not being taken seriously. So this was my childhood, and I understood early on that not everyone is treated equally, and that sometimes you have to really fight to get heard. I decided that I wanted to do something about this, and if we just go to the next slide, I started my career in the charity sector, and it was really inspiring. I started working from some amazing organizations and fulfilling this desire I had to kind of, help people who I thought weren't being treated equally in society. And it was really fulfilling to dedicate my time in this way, and for people, to see if you put strategy and energy and resource into things, then, people's rights can be taken seriously. But there was something bugging me during these years. I noticed a tendency in the sector to speak on behalf of service users rather than empowering them to speak for themselves. So I'd work for organizations, and if there was a big campaign or a big news story where the organization needed to be on the news and comment, rather than actually asking those people who had experienced the issue and helping them to get ready for the interview and actually speak for themselves, we would often, get the head of policy or the chief executive on the news. And that seemed to me, it was kind of against everything that I'd learned as I was growing up, which was that, it is those people who are experiencing the problems that have the most legitimacy to speak about those issues. And I was also, this was early 2000s, I was also struck by the whiteness in the sector. So, the charity sector, and I went into that because I was from a marginal community, from a working class family, woman of color, and I expected to find other people like me who maybe had felt that they were overlooked in society. But actually what I found was that there was actually a lot of power and privilege at play within the sector itself, which actually led me to start the People of Colour in Campaigns Network that Meta mentioned at the start. Now, my activism is supporting people, especially those from marginal groups, to be heard and to disrupt that status quo that stopped me and my family from being heard when I was growing up. And it's to help people like Lindsay. If we go to the next slide, this is Lindsay Garrett and her 8-year-old daughter. I met them a few years ago, and when they were facing homelessness, along with 92 other families, because an American property company had bought their estate in Hoxton, so not far from the King's Cross area. You might have heard of it. It was called New Era Estate. One day, out of the blue, Lindsay got a letter through her door saying that the company was planning to hike up their rent by 3 times. So a rent of around £600 would go up to 1,800. They were told to sign the letter or make a plan to leave by the next year. As a single mum and an NHS worker, Lindsay just could not afford that. But she'd lived in Hoxton her whole life, along with 3 generations of her family. And there were so many families like that who had that area in their blood and that estate itself. I think Lindsay's family actually had all grown up in that estate. Because for decades, the New Era estate had been protected as affordable housing in a city that was pushing out locals with sky-high rents. London was on the brink of a housing crisis because of property companies like this. So Lindsay wanted to do something. She wanted to fight for her home, and she didn't want to just take it lying down. She held meetings with other residents and started planning a campaign. I mean, I don't think at the time she was thinking of it as an actual campaign. They were just thinking, we've got to fight this. But that's where some of the best, greatest campaigns happen. And that's when we met, because in an attempt to get their story heard, they started a petition on change.org. Once that petition caught fire, the campaign was unstoppable. And local resident Russell Brand threw in his support. The mayor of New York spoke up, saying that they would never allow this kind of thing to happen in their city. And we organized a petition delivery. If you just go to the next slide, this picture was taken on the day of that delivery with Russell Brand, Lindsay at the front in the center, her daughters there at the bottom, and then the other mums who fought alongside her. I remember this day quite vividly because this was the day that I realized that the campaign had really turned into something else. We were organizing the petition delivery, and we planned to meet outside of the Property Developers UK London office. And we were going to invite supporters to meet us there, and then we were going to do a march from that office all the way down to Downing Street to hand in the petition. The day before, I remember speaking to my colleagues and kind of saying, what if nobody turns up? What if it's just us and Lindsay and, Russell? And we thought, okay, even if nobody turns up, we'll just make the most of it, and we'll take loads of photos, and we'll have handed in the petition and into Downing Street, and we'll get this great shot outside of Downing Street. And on the day I went to meet them, and I had those boxes with me on this trolley, and I was walking. I think the office was in Mayfair, and I turned the corner to get to the office, and I just saw 500 people all just gathered around, milling around, waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. I hadn't quite appreciated until this moment how many people had their imaginations had really been captured by this campaign. We had, I think on this picture, it says 293,000 signatures on the petition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how many people are going to be willing to leave their house during a weekday morning to come to London and to come to a protest. So there were hundreds of people, and because we hadn't expected this, we hadn't really planned for it, and so the police obviously had turned up, and had to ask them very nicely if they would help me shepherd 500 people from Mayfair to Downing Street. And but the only problem was nobody was following me because I'm quite short, and they were all just enamored by Russell Brand. And so I had to ask him to follow me. And so you had this group of 500 kind of following a very tall Russell Brand, who was following a very short me as we walked across central London, the police stopping traffic. We went through Piccadilly, Leicester Square, and got down to Downing Street. And we hadn't actually put Russell's name on the Downing Street form to come to, past the gates. And So we had to have a very tricky conversation with the security guards, who were actually very nice, and they agreed at the last minute to allow him through because they believed who he was. That was really one of the most pivotal moments of the campaign because of the amount of support it got, but also because the campaign then went from a London story to national news. Within months of Lindsay's petition going viral, and before long, the property company gave up and sold the estate to a housing charity. I think this story was very reminiscent of the miners' strike and the fight for equal pay by Ford factory workers in the 60s. It captured the country's imagination in telling the story of 93 Davids versus a massive Goliath. This property company was faceless. It was a US company. They were so far away from us. We looked on the website and it wasn't even clear who ran this organization. You couldn't get names of the chief exec, of the board members. So it felt very difficult to be able to really target the decision maker here. So they really felt like a Goliath. But unlike former campaigns, New Era won in a matter of weeks, really because the internet had taken this beautifully kind of compelling story and the campaigning and turbocharged it, making solidarity and mobilization bigger and faster and more powerful than ever before. Now, let's go to the next slide. What can we learn from this story for rebuilding our communities post-pandemic? It's an old campaign. I worked on it maybe, I think 5 or 6 years ago, but it actually has so many timeless lessons. And the first lesson is about passion. Lindsay was passionate about this because it affected her life and her child's life. It was her lived experience that propelled her. Now, the term lived experience has become a bit of a cliche in the sector, but what it really means is that Lindsay's experience made her an expert on housing issues, just as much of an expert as the housing minister or a chief executive of a housing charity. Because a working class single mum couldn't be told no because she spoke from a place of honesty and truth and experience, the kind of experience that none of those others, the housing minister or the CEO, had. It's also important for people with those lived experiences to speak up because it leads to better decision making. Often, the people making big decisions in society have similar life experiences, education, and perspectives. But a diversity of beliefs, perspectives, and styles can lead to a de-biasing impact on complex decisions. It lowers the likelihood of groupthink, and it makes it easier to come up with out-of-the-box ideas. And finally, it creates trust, because when you bring people into the fold, they're more likely to continue on the journey with you because they trust that they will be heard if things aren't going well. Next slide. The second lesson is on precision. When campaigning, it's a common mistake to go big and try and solve it all with a big, ambitious campaign ask, like petitioning the government to fix the whole of the housing crisis or asking the G7 to end climate change now. At Change.org, we see people launch hundreds of campaigns every day on issues affecting their individual lives and their communities by highlighting a tangible problem. It can be that first step to a big systemic change. Lindsay's campaign started a people-powered movement and public conversation about the national housing crisis, but she never set out to do that. She simply wanted a US property company to allow her and the other families to live affordably. But it was the specifics of the issue that captured the nation's attention, because this one story in Hoxton represented so many others. And the final lesson, if we just go to the next slide, is persistence. The people who don't give up are the ones who end up winning. If you're passionate about a cause, you're much more likely to persist with it. The people that we work with, in my years of campaigning and working with activists, it's those that remain determined, that maintain this dogged belief that they're right and that the victory is achievable. They're the ones who go on to win because they don't give up, because giving up isn't an option. The key to creating change is to keep going. And the next slide, what can organizations learn from this story? And I just have one lesson here: listen. And I mean really listening. Real listening is a skill. It's active, intentional. It's not waiting to say your piece. If you're really listening, you're open to changing your mind. The residents of New Era are now consulted closely on the big decisions the housing charity that owns the estate want to make. They have a great relationship with the decision makers, and it makes the entire estate a healthier, happier place. Too often, leaders in organizations think they have to present a front to their service users or customers or staff. But when you're honest and transparent and open to listening, you're telling people that you trust them. I've seen so many examples from the work that we do of better decisions being made when decision makers are open their door and start engaging. I think this point is particularly important because it drives home something that I believe deeply. Great leadership is not about you. It's about the people that you are leading and serving those people. And you can't do that unless you demonstrate active, intentional listening. So we'll just go on to the final slide. COVID has caused endless harm to our lives. As we heard in the opening speech, the chaos and disruption it has caused pulled out the thread holding our society, our organizations, our own lives together. And what we decide to do next in stitching it all back together is critical. Will we simply stitch it back together as it was before, or create something new, something better altogether? Some of these challenges are existential, and some of them won't go away unless they're approached in a new way. My message to you today is we need to seize this chaos as an opportunity to reset, reimagine the future of the UK, and to shape it for the better. And we will only really do this if we all, organizations, institutions, the public, all believe that change is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We've got a few questions that we're going to put to you before we move on. I was struck by what you said, we should all be activists. I know you've got a book that's come out that's telling us all how we can do it. But if there were young people or people of all ages who live in the Norwich Quarter area who are unhappy with things happening in their area, they're unhappy about the lack of opportunities that they've got, whether it's working, whether it's skills, whether it's educational opportunities. And if they want to take control in their own hands, what top tips would you offer to those people, for those communities?
Yeah, I would first of all say that, back to that point about passion, it's don't be deterred by the fact that you are a young person or you're not in those kind of, positions of power, because often actually it's your experience and who you are that will actually make you more powerful. Tell your story. Storytelling is the most powerful tool, in my opinion, in activism and in an activist's belt. It's how you get supporters engaged. It's how you get journalists to tell your story. It's how you get decision makers to actually sit down and listen to you. And so it's your experiences that is really the source of your stories. Often when we come across petitions on our platform, we actually have to really speak to the petition starter. We reach out to them and we actually have to speak to them to really find out more about their own story, because people don't really realize the power of their experiences. Often it's on the phone where we'll find out, oh, Lindsay's campaigning about this because she lives on the estate, because she's got kids on the estate, because 3 generations of her family were on the estate. All of that came out through talking to her and going, this is your story, like tell it, it's your power, And then the point about precision is like, be specific with your campaign. Don't just if you're not happy with the area, don't first of all be specific with the decision maker. So really think about who it is in that area or that institution that can really change the decision. Too often I think people target the prime minister or the head, the chief executive, but actually it's probably somebody a little bit further down the line that could be the critical decision maker who really needs to hear from you. And also really being tangible about what you want to change. And then finally is just don't give up. I think that's easier said than done, and especially today's world, things that happen so fast, we lose our attention so quickly. But actually, it's the campaigns like, you mentioned Laura Corrigan in the introduction. She kept on, I think many of us thought that her campaign was going to win within a few months, and it was a 2-3 year campaign, but she won in the end, because she just didn't give up. And I think then decision makers often think, oh, they'll run out of energy soon and then it will blow over. You need to show them it's not going to blow over, that you're not going anywhere.
Yeah. And I know your advice to organizations is to listen. But very often, one of the complaints that we do hear from local communities and local people is that, well, we're doing the talking and organizations are listening, but then actually nothing's happening after that. So how can you can be a little bit firmer with us, Kajal? Tell knowledge culture organizations who are attending this call and who are listening to this session, tell us, other than listening and after listening, what are the next things that we ought to be doing?
Well, if you're really listening, you know what the next thing is. But I think what's been what the problem is, and I'll kind of speak to an example in a minute. One of the problems is that people previously always thought of listening as like, got to tick that box off, and then we'll move on to the next stage, because maybe there's this perception that if you show that you're listening, then the problem will go away. That's all that person wants, is just to be heard. But actually, listening and a conversation is a two-way street. And what that means is really hearing what the problems are and then co-creating what the solutions can be together. When after George Floyd, our own organization at change.org had a moment of reckoning. We had to ask ourselves, because we're a global organization, we're based in the US, is our leadership diverse enough? Is our board diverse enough? Are we practicing anti-racism truly on a daily basis? And we realized that all of those, the answers to all of that was like, no. And what we did was we paused the organization for a month to have a reset, and we basically created committees of staff from a mixture of seniority, age, gender, and global region, and we asked them to explore different pillars of the organization, including how decisions are made, and they came back and they reported out to leadership, and most of those decisions have been signed off. Most of the changes that they requested have been signed off, because we paused to listen. And I think often with listening, people think that means just pausing, and then you're not really listening to what the other person is saying because you're getting ready to respond. But really listening means you don't know what's going to happen next, because you need to actually hear from the other person.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In all the campaigns that you've managed or that you've run, Kajal, what's the most successful in Europe, or the one that you feel is the most successful in all these years?
That's a really hard question. I mean, it's a really, really hard question, because we've had some huge campaigns, and some of them, the Richard Ratcliffe's fight to free Nazanin, she's still in prison. And, if you haven't signed the petition, sign it. It's change.org/free Nazanin. So, on the surface, that doesn't look like a victory, but that campaign has many people in Richard's position are told not to speak up, because that they will put they're told by the Foreign Office, you'll put the person's life at risk if you speak up. It'll make it harder to get them out. But actually, that's a great way of just keeping families quiet. Richard didn't do that. And it's one of those few campaigns where if I just say Nazanin, people know what I'm talking about. Yeah. It started a conversation with campaigners and the government about how we treat prisoners abroad. You as a British citizen think, like I thought, if I get locked up abroad, the UK government will help me. There's actually nothing in legislation to say that they need to do that. And so it started a conversation about our rights abroad and actually what the UK government's responsibility is. And it's made Nazanin feel so much less lonely. In this prison around on the other side of the world, she doesn't know that her name is recognizable just from the first word. But she does know that every Sunday when they speak on the phone, it's this many signatures now. And then Richard will sometimes read out comments to her from the petition. And there's been moments where he's asked people to send Christmas cards, birthday cards, and they will send them to Nazanin. And for somebody who's in isolation, I mean, it means the world to her. So, and it's been a real great sense of strength for Richard. So, yeah, it's difficult to say. And the reason I mentioned the New Era one today was just because that was the first campaign. It was just one of those campaigns where everybody said it's never going to win, because there was no reason for this luxury property developer company to back down. There was no incentive. And so everybody said it was not going to win. And so then the day that Lindsay called me up, just giddy, and I was on the bus, and she just said they're going to back out and they're going to sell it off to a charity. I was just like, wow, nothing is impossible. So it's those moments that kind of, I guess they make you think about things differently, and those two campaigns really have.
Sure. And finally, just the last question, more sort of trying to probe about your own personal journey, Kajal. It's remarkable you, at a very young age, have done so much amazing work in the field of activism. You've enabled people from all different types of backgrounds. But how did it all begin? What was the sort of turning point in your life that made you feel this is the area of it? You're not doing what a typical Asian person might do, an Asian girl for that matter. But what's made you feel that this is the area of work that you want to do? I'm mindful there might be young people from minority ethnic communities from the Knowledge Quarter who are either listening to this live or who will listen to this later on, who are probably thinking, how can I become like Kajal in years to come?
And we spoke a bit about this when we were chatting for this, and talked about how, growing up, we didn't really have people who looked like us in, at least for me, I grew up in the Midlands. I just didn't see those kinds of role models. And so as much as I cringe at the idea of being a role model, because it just feels a little bit grandiose, I do think it's really important that, young people of color do realize, and especially from working class communities, do realize that, you don't, that you can be, for them to see the things that they could be. And I guess for me, there's a couple of things that were key. One, I've got 3 other sisters, so there's four girls in the family, and I think our parents never treated us like typical girls. We were never held back, and I think that was quite progressive for an Indian family from my community, where often the girls are made to learn to cook, and your sights aren't set very wide or far from a young age. And then I'd say it was really, experiencing, if we hadn't moved from Leicester, from this Black and Asian community, and experienced what it felt like to be not accepted in society when we moved to the white working class village, I'm not sure, who knows what would have happened, but that really developed a sense of fight in me, because I saw my dad and my mum just fight back every day. They ran a shop, and so it was very visible, them kind of trying to get help from the authorities, and just being stubborn and persistent. They never gave up, and eventually years later, those the crime really died down and the racism stopped because they continued advocating for themselves. So I think that was really something that just absorbed in me. And then I just found myself on the school council, going to university, and I wasn't really conscious that this was campaigning. Went to university, was on the committee. I just had this desire to make sure that, people's views were being heard. So it was kind of, it happened subconsciously, I suppose, but I think it was always gonna happen.
Well, we're glad it's happened, as you are a role model, Kajal, and your book is fantastic. I picked up a copy at the British Library when I was in their bookshop last, and I've given it as a gift to lots of people in my family. So I recommend it. It's a great book. Do go and get it. And Kajal, thanks for joining us for our first keynote session of the Knowledge Quarter conference. We hope that we can invite you back again. I'd love for you actually to put you in the middle of a group of young students from Regent High or from one of the other schools in the Knowledge Quarter area. I think that they could learn a lot. I think you could really enjoy that experience as well. So we hope we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kajal. Thanks so much.